Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SCA's 36th monthly Zoom presentation. This is our third year anniversary. I might say this is one of the few good things to come out of the pandemic, the fact that the SCA started these presentations in order to keep the membership engaged, and 3 years later, we're still at it with no end in sight. My name is Brian Gallagher. I'm the Vice President of the SCA. I will be your host tonight. Welcome to all our guests, and particularly followers of the American Candlepin Bowling Association. We're happy you took the time out of your winter evening, it's spring now actually, to watch an SCA presentation. I hope you enjoy the show. And for anyone watching the recording of this episode on the SCA's monthly presentations who's not a member of the SCA, we earnestly ask you to consider joining. Funding for the various activities of the SCA comes almost entirely from our membership. Just visit our website at www.sca-roadside.org and follow the links. Now I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's presentation. Candlepin bowling is hard. So hard, in fact, that no one has ever bowled a perfect game. The pins are tall and skinny. The balls are the size of a grapefruit, and the fallen pins are not cleared between rolls. Originating in Worcester, Mass. In the late 19th century and played today mostly in New England and Eastern Canada, the game has a rich and colorful history. In the days before automation, sure-footed pin boys manually reset the pins and returned the balls. A long-running top-rated Boston television show regularly transformed unassuming candlepinners into regional celebrities. And the game has something called a half Worcester. Author and photographer Susan Mara Bregman is the author of New England Candlepin Bowling, which describes the history of the game, its distinctive characteristics, people, and places. She has also bowled at dozens of candlepin centers, combed through dusty archives, and interviewed industry leaders and insiders to create this affectionate look at one of America's quirkiest pastimes. Sandra, would you unmute yourself and give us your presentation?
I'm sure you meant Susan, not Sandra.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, of course, Susan.
But we're off to a great start. Hi, I'm Susan. I'm a writer, I'm a photographer, and I'm sort of retired from my career as a transportation consultant. And tonight I'm here to talk about candlepin bowling. So I'd like to start this presentation by reading a short section from my book. I grew up in New York, where 10-pin was the only game in town. I discovered candlepins when I moved to Boston after college. I wish I could say it was love at first sight, but that wasn't the case. I played a game here or there, but for most of my adult life, I was oblivious to bowling in any of its variations. But one night I got together with a couple of old friends and we decided to go bowling. Once I laced up that pair of rental shoes and picked up one of those small balls, I was hooked. Much to my chagrin, I was not a good bowler. Okay, I was a terrible bowler. Even when I tried to sneak in a few extra balls by not pressing the reset button, I could barely knock down any pins. But that's the beauty of candlepin bowling. There's always room for improvement. Okay, there we go. So first, let me give you a quick overview of candlepin bowling for anyone who's not familiar with the game. As Brian said, the game uses tall, skinny pins. I have a pin here, which we can look at in the Q&A, but there it is if you can see me. And they are cylindrical. They're identical top and bottom. There's no top, no bottom. The balls are small. They're about the size of a grapefruit. They have no finger holes, so you can hold them in the palm of your hand. Players have 3 rolls per frame, and these frames are usually called boxes. And one of the key characteristics is that the pins are not cleared between rolls. So you can see here in this picture on the right, the pins are down, and that means they stay in play, and you can use those pins as part of your strategy to try to knock down the standing pins. The game is currently played almost exclusively in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, but there are a few outliers. There's actually a Candlepin alley outside of Cincinnati. It's not quite clear how it got there, but it's been there for a really long time. And they pop up here and there. I think there's one in Chicago as well. So Candlepin bowling was invented in Worcester, Massachusetts in the 1880s. Justin Pop White, this gentleman here in the beard, he owned a billiards hall in Worcester, and he was looking for another game to entertain his customers. He reportedly found a few dowels, wooden dowels in a closet, and reimagined them as bowling pins. To probably no one's surprise, they were too hard to knock down, and he had to go back to the drawing board. A few years later, Jack Munsey entered the picture. That's this guy here on the right, the sort of shifty looking guy. He was an itinerant pool player, and Pop White hired him on the spot when he showed up. Together, White and Munsey modified White's original game and came up with the game we know today, Candlepin bowling. So Candlepin is one of 4 types of small ball bowling played in the US and Canada. The others are duck pins, which is played mostly in southern New England and the mid-Atlantic. Rubber band duck pins, which are duck pins, but with a rubber band around the belly of the pin. And that's played mostly or almost exclusively in Quebec. And 5-pin bowling, which is played across Canada. And I'm sure Brian can tell you all about that. So there are 4 types of small ball bowling in the US and Canada. So once Munsey and White developed the game, teams and leagues quickly sprang up, and they had like names of the era, like the Daffodils, the Speed Boys, the Skidoos. These are the Cardinals. This is a Massachusetts team. And you can see in the early days of the game, people dressed up to play. Newspapers at the time covered bowling tournaments with breathless enthusiasm, and it was an incredibly popular game. Bowling leagues thrived from the 1950s into the 1980s, and they provided a reliable source of income for Candlepin houses. The leagues of the day were typically sponsored by factories, by businesses, religious institutions, and social organizations. These are two leagues from Worcester, probably around 1960, and they represented restaurant workers on the left and insurance workers on the right. And you can see the tradition of wearing ties continued into 1960. Until the 1950s, the bowling pins were set by hand. And in the really early days of the game, pin setters were usually young boys, like 9 or 10-year-old young boys. And this is a photo here. This is a Candlepin alley in Burlington, Vermont. And it's a photo by Lewis Hine, who was a documentary photographer, and he was documenting child labor at the beginning of the 20th century. And you probably know his work from the, mill workers and sardine workers and all sorts of child labor. Child labor was regulated in the 1930s, and pin setters got a little older. They tended more to be teenagers and young adults, but they still worked at bowling houses well into the 1950s. And that's when a company called Bowlmore, which was based in Littleton, Massachusetts, introduced automated pin setters. They introduced them at Whalen Park. That was where they did their demo. And Whalen Park was a now defunct amusement park in Lunenburg, Massachusetts, which is near Littleton. And Bowlmore dominated the industry, the Candlepin pin setting industry, into the 1960s till the company went out of business. And today, many of those Bowlmore machines are still running, although sometimes they need a little help. The pin setter on the right is still running. That's at Boston Bowl in Boston, in Dorchester, but it is not a Bowlmore machine. I think it's an AMC machine, if I'm not mistaken. before the ball returns were invented in the 1930s, automated ball returns, pinboys returned the balls by rolling them down a ramp. Gravity and momentum did the rest of the work. The earliest automated ball returns had visible tracks. You can see them here in the top right and the bottom right. The top right is Wakefield Bowlodrome, and the bottom right is Needham Bowlaway. And later models like this, the upper left here, had the tracks hidden underneath the wood, underneath the approach. Gravity and momentum are still in play, and the automation mostly transports the ball from the pit to the top of the ramp, and then again they roll back to the player. Scorekeeping has evolved over the years. Of course, it was once a paper and pencil affair, and some bowling houses still use paper and pencil. But some Candlepin houses have introduced high-tech systems that calculate the pinfall automatically and automatically reset the pins. But my favorite are the telescore systems. These are the coolest ones. So these look kind of like something out of the Jetsons, and they're pretty hard to find these days, especially ones that work. And even the bowling centers that have them now usually reserve them for league play. So they're really, really not in wide public use. Telescores still require players to score manually, but instead of paper and pencil, you're using a wax pencil, and you're writing on a plastic screen. So they work kind of like the overhead projectors that a lot of us might remember from school. And the scores are projected onto a screen over the lane. So when you do manual scoring, players have to reset the pins between turns. And they either use a button or sometimes they use a foot pedal, depending on the bowling alley. So here's a pair of reset buttons at Bolo's in Brunswick, Maine. That's where the telescores were as well. And Bolo's was kind of a cool story. It used to be a bowling alley known as the Bowling Bowl. And it had 6 lanes, and that's where Maine Senator Angus King used to bowl in his league. And then the bowling alley was about to close, and Bolo stepped in and turned it into a combination restaurant and bowling alley. They ripped out 2 of the lanes to create the restaurant part. But sadly, they recently changed their business model, and they ripped out all the lanes. I think they replaced them with cornhole boards. So a little different approach now. So I don't know what happened to these. I don't know what happened to the pin setters. I don't know what happened to the lanes. Maybe someone might know on the call. So a lot of people, especially in the Boston metro area, associate Candlepin bowling with a very popular Saturday show on Channel 5. And Don Gillis was responsible for that. Don Gillis was the sports director for Channel 5, but he was the host for a Saturday show known as Candlepin Bowling, very simple name. And that show aired from 1958 to 1996. And on some weeks, it got better ratings than the Bruins or the Red Sox. So it was incredibly popular. And one of the keys to its popularity was that it turned everyday people into celebrities by virtue of their skill at Candlepin bowling. And it also helped support the game and support the popularity of the game, because viewers sort of started flocking to Candlepin houses to see if they could bowl as well as their television idols. So it was really an integral part of the game for years, for 38 years. So Tom Olsta, the gentleman in the red shirt, he was one of the superstars of Candlepin bowling during the television era. His accomplishments included a 22-week run on the Candlepin bowling show. And here he is receiving a trophy from Don Gillis in the tan suit in the center, and a very young Ed Harding, who I believe is still an anchor on Channel 5, if I'm not mistaken. The Candlepin Bowling Show spawned multiple competitors, or imitators, I should say. And bowling shows aired throughout New England for years. Here's a shot of Brian Leary, also of Channel 5, congratulating bowler Joe Tavernese. Another local show was called Candlepins for Cash, which I think was the best name. And it was known especially for its pin pals. Viewers would send in postcards, you can see here, and they would hope to be selected out of a big, barrel, and they would share prizes with bowlers on the show. And every now and then they would write little snarky messages on their postcards. You can see here, the person who sent it wrote, "Do you really put this in a barrel for drawing, or do you just throw it away?" So you never quite know. So now I'm going to talk about the people and places in the game for a little bit. Stacia Zernicke. Stacia was widely considered to be the best female bowler around, or here you can see they called her the first lady of Candlepin bowling, although some people just thought she was the best Candlepin bowler, period. She was a world champion 8 times, world meaning US and Canada, a Massachusetts state champion 12 times, and she logged 55 appearances on Candlepin Bowling on the TV show. She was originally from Worcester, Massachusetts, and a short stretch of roadway in her hometown was renamed in her honor in 1996, which is, I think, a pretty cool honor, speaking as a former transportation consultant. These are the 3 oldest Candlepin houses in Massachusetts. Putnam Street Lanes in Fitchburg is the one on the top right, and that's the oldest one. It's on the 2nd floor of a building in downtown Fitchburg, and it's just off of Main Street. You can see the old ball returns there with the exposed tracks, and the rest of the place has gone through a little bit of an upgrade, a little rehab, but that's the oldest one. And Shelburne Falls Bowling Alley opened in 1906. That's the one on the left, and that's in a little structure behind Main Street, or I think it's called Bridge Street in Shelburne Falls. And Needham Bowlaway dates from 1917, and that's the oldest Candlepin center in Metro Boston, and that has 8 lanes in a basement. And the earliest Candlepin lanes, the earliest Candlepin houses actually were small. They were 6 lanes, 8 lanes, and they were often tucked away in basements or on 2nd floors, in church basements. You could find them in private clubs. And it was only in the 1950s when people started, or really the post-war era, I guess I should say, when people started moving out into the suburbs and freestanding bowling alleys started being built. And then they started being built with, 20, 30, 40, 50 lanes. But the old ones, they have 6 lanes, they have 8 lanes. So this is Brighton Bowl. Brighton Bowl is one of the newest Candlepin alleys in the state, and it's actually part of a flatbread restaurant. It's also the place where I went with my friends when I discovered my love for Candlepin bowling, so it has a special place for me. This is Central Park Lanes in East Boston. Again, you can see the really old ball returns here. These are a couple of Candlepin lanes in Maine. On the left is Bowlerama, and that's in Sanford, Maine. And on the right is the Big 20 in Scarborough on Route 1. Big 20 has 20 lanes, and it was originally called the State of Maine, and that's what the sign above the door still says. And when it opened in 1950, it had 3 kinds of bowling. It had duck pins, it had candlepins, and it had 10 pins. And it was fairly easy to do that in the beginning, in the days before automated pin setters, because you didn't have to commit to a certain kind of equipment. You could just have pin boys, and they could arrange whatever pins you wanted them to arrange and whatever balls you wanted to use. So the bowling center did change its name from State of Maine to Big 20 pretty early on. but it converted to an all Candlepin house probably in the late 50s when it acquired automated pin setters. And now it's 20 Candlepin lanes. This is Brian's Bowlaway in Gardner, Massachusetts. Brian Favreau bought the place in the 1980s, but it probably dates back to the 1930s. This one has 14 lanes, so it's still on the small side. This is Sawyer's Bowlodrome. It's just 6 lanes in a basement in Northborough, Massachusetts. Ernie Sawyer Jr., he opened the place with his father, Ernie Sr., in 1953, and Ernie Jr. still runs the place. And I love this. I love the decor. I love the wooden paneling here. It's like bowling in somebody's basement. It's really cool. And bowling alleys often have the best signs. And here are some of my favorites. Wakefield Bowlodrome, top left there. That's a pretty classic plastic sign. The cool thing about Wakefield is it just appeared in a Ben Affleck movie. Going counterclockwise, Sunnyside Bowl in Danvers has really one of the coolest neon signs around for a bowling alley. Woburn Bowlodrome in Massachusetts. Woburn has that's a really great typeface. I really love that. And I really hate that light pole that ruins every single shot I've taken of that sign. And then there's Leda Lanes. Leda Lanes is in Nashua, New Hampshire. And that sign has a little bit of everything. It's got some neon bowling pins. It's got some plastic, and it's got a variable message sign. So, and then if you kind of squint, it looks a little bit like a Holiday Inn sign. So I kind of love that sign. And this is a brand new sign. Brighton Bowl, when they opened up, they commissioned a brand new neon sign to welcome their visitors. And you can see behind the letters that spell out bowl, you can see a Candlepin. So that has, that's pretty cool. And this is Cape Ann Lanes in Gloucester. Again, a spectacular bowling neon sign. And it's one of the Candlepin houses that's trying to reinvent the game. Caitlin and Nick Zenny held their wedding reception there in 2016. And then a few months later, the couple teamed up with Nick's uncle and they bought the place. They recently opened a brew pub on site, and they offer brews called Keep on Rollin' IPA and 7-Pin Stout. Other Candlepin houses have followed suit, and they've introduced food and booze to keep their customers occupied. Sacco's in Somerville is another flatbread combo bowling alley. Brighton Bowl, as I said, has flatbread pizza. Ron's Ice Cream and Bowling in Hyde Park, a neighborhood of Boston, they have homemade ice cream and are constantly winning awards for their ice cream. But speaking of beer, Castle Island Beer, a microbrewery in Massachusetts, offers a brew called Candlepin as part of their series honoring local features. And this is Bowlorama in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So this is also on Route 1. Bowlorama opened in 1956. And the Genematis family owned it for years. They ran it for years. And then Andrew Medeiros and his parents bought the place from the Genematis family a few years ago, and they began to modernize the place. So today, Bowlorama has a state-of-the-art scoring system, plush seating, they offer food, they have booze, and you can see here, they have cosmic bowling. So, you know, sort of a light show to make bowling more fun. And here's Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth loved all kinds of bowling. I think the Baseball Hall of Fame has one of his bowling bags on display. But he was said to favor the small ball varieties, duck pin and candlepin. This photo's from 1930. We don't know where he is. We don't know if he's bowling duck pins or candle pins. The balls are slightly different sizes. Duck pins are a little bigger than candle pin balls, but it's pretty hard to tell here. And we know he's from Baltimore, where duck pins are said to have originated, although there's also a case to be made for Lowell, Massachusetts. He played for the Red Sox and lived in Massachusetts for a while, so he could have been bowling Candlepin. We'll probably never know, but he was definitely a small ball man. That's what we know about Babe Ruth. So a lot of Candlepin places are gone, and I just want to highlight a few of them. This is Wallex. It was a massive entertainment complex in Waltham, Massachusetts, and it was on the Lexington line, and that's how they got the name Wallex. In addition to Candlepin bowling, the center offered roller skating, miniature golf, billiards, and video games. When it closed in 2002, some of the lanes ended up at Needham Bowlaway. And this photo is courtesy of the Waltham Historical Society. And the city of Waltham honored the legacy of Wallex by installing 4 Candlepin lanes in its recreation center in the basement of a school in downtown Waltham. And I had the pleasure of interviewing the mayor at those, the mayor of Waltham, at those bowling lanes. Those lanes were new, and they're not quite regulation length, but they are available for Waltham residents. And the city also rescued a few treasures from Wallex, including some wooden benches and this mural here. And on the mural, you can see how it's spelled Wallex in the carpeting in the background there. And you can also see the old ball returns here. This was Turnpike Bowlodrome. And that was later known as Lanes and Games. It was on Route 2 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was known as Turnpike Bowlodrome because Route 2 is also known as the Concord Turnpike. Red Sox slugger Jim Rice supposedly, well, not supposedly, he did bowl here. And he filmed a promo for the Massachusetts Bowling Association here. And a fun fact about that promo is that even though the PSA featured Jim Rice, Tommy Olsta actually did the bowling. He just did it off camera. Lanes and Games closed a few years ago, and I believe there are condos on the site now. And that's a sad story about a lot of bowling alleys right now. Their land is worth more than the business. Malden Bowlodrome on the left was in Malden, Massachusetts, had some pretty sweet neon there. And Bowlamat in Beverly also had some very sweet neon that just closed a few years ago. And actually, I think this pin is from Beverly Bowlamat. This is Colonial Bowl in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I started this presentation talking about Worcester, and I want to end this presentation talking about Worcester. I bowled at Colonial Bowl in March 2020. It was just as Massachusetts was locking down for COVID. I was there probably the day before things started locking down, and it was weird. It was weird. People were wiping down the bowling balls with disinfectant wipes. There were bottles of hand sanitizer everywhere, and it was just a strange time. And then everything locked down for the pandemic that week. And Colonial just announced that they were not going to reopen. So they were gone. They're gone now. Colonial opened in 1960, and it was a mid-century time capsule. You can see here the color of those benches, the mid-century aqua, and I guess that's coral. The center changed so little over the 6 decades. It opened in 1960 that it still had a rotary dial telephone almost up until the time that it closed. So it was a huge loss to the Worcester community and to the Candlepin community overall when this place closed. So let me wrap up with a few more words from my book and with a happy postscript. I've bowled bad games, to be sure, but I've never had a bad experience in a Candlepin house. It's true that as of this writing, I have not rolled a strike, but as I wrote earlier, that's the beauty of Candlepin bowling. There's always room for hope. And here's my happy postscript. I've rolled a strike. I rolled strikes at 2 Candlepin houses on Route 1 in Maine, All Play in Brunswick and Oakland Park in Rockland. And speaking of Route 1, whoops, wait, back. Okay, well, speaking of Route 1, that's my next book. My next book comes out on May 22nd, and it's called Along Route 1, and Along Route 1, Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And it looks at roadside attractions and historic artifacts in those 3 states along Route 1. So I hope you check that one out. So here's my contact info. You can order books if you're so inclined from me, but they're also available wherever books are sold. And I hope you follow me on Facebook and Instagram. So thank you. I think I will turn it back to Brian now.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. That was a most excellent presentation. I just find these kind of things fascinating, and it's a true SCA piece, no question about it. We have a lot of activity on the chat. We have all kinds of people talking about their reminiscences and their experiences, and one person talking about their misspent youth in these Candlepin bowling lanes. And so you'll see all that, but you've brought back a lot of memories for people. And we have some questions for you too. And I have some questions. One thing I found was interesting was the TV show Cash for Candlepins. I used to watch a TV show here in Toronto, Ontario called Bowling for Dollars. And it was out of Hamilton, actually. And it was a very popular show too. I'm sure it was a very similar theme to the Cash for Candlepins.
Oh, I'm sure. There was one when I went to college in Rhode Island, and that was when I played duck pins a little bit, and there was a show there called Duck Pins for Dollars, so I think it was pretty common.
There you go. Now we have a question from Jonathan Mossback. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but he says, I wish there were lanes in Pennsylvania. I drive 5 hours a couple of times a month to go to Massachusetts. We don't have duck pin in PA. And it kind of begs the question of why is this such a regional thing and never spread out to other parts of the US?
You know, people ask that all the time. And it's really interesting because all of those small ball bowling variants and also nine pin, which is not small ball, but it's a bowling variant. They all have regional, they're all confined to specific regions. And 9 pins in Texas. But I don't know. Some people say it's just because, it's economics. These days the pin setters are hard to get. There's one company still manufacturing pin setters. It's not Bowlmore anymore. It's another company. The people who know how to fix the pin setters are hard to find. I know who they are, but they're hard to find. It's sort of analogous to neon signs. It's like there aren't people making the signs anymore. There aren't people who can fix the signs anymore. And it's a little bit like that with Candlepin bowling as well. I don't know. Everybody says that all the time. Why isn't there more Candlepin bowling? Why isn't there Candlepin bowling in Florida where all the Massachusetts people retire? I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe people have other theories.
Interesting. Deborah Jane Seltzer, who is a SCA member, of course, and an expert on signs, has put in the chat a link to an interactive map of Candlepin locations. I'm sure you've seen that before, but the link is there, so you'll be able to check that out a bit later on. We had let me see, there was quite a bit of conversation in the chat about the TV personalities. And apparently Ed Harding is still on Channel 5, although the commenter is Dave Brigham mentions when he seems so young in the picture that you showed.
I know. He was so cute there.
Jonathan also says, I'm probably the only person in Pennsylvania to have the book Lunch with Tommy and Stacia, written by Mike Moran. What's that book all about? Do you know?
I do know, because Mike Moran wrote the foreword to my book. I have a copy of it. Mike wrote a book about the personalities in Candlepin bowling, and Lunch with Tommy and Stacia. As I said, both Tommy Ulsta and Stacia Zernicke appeared on the Candlepin bowling show many, many, many times. So, and the show was at lunchtime, so people would sort of have lunch with Tommy and Stacia. And Mike's book is really a lot of anecdotes and reminiscences and interviews with a lot of the personalities in the game. And it's a very fun read.
Okay. That kind of, well, there's another question here about, are the lanes the same length and size as 10-pin lanes? And that kind of begs the question too that I had. So that question comes from, let me see here. It comes from Michael Sino, who is or maybe it's Pisno. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, Michael. I'm sure I massacred your name there. Sorry, maybe it's Pisno. Anyways, he asked the question, is the Candlepin lane the same length and width as a 10-pin lane? And my question to follow up on that would be, have there been many conversions from Candlepin bowling centers to 10-pin bowling centers?
I'm not sure about conversions. The lanes are the same. Obviously the pin setters are different, and so you would have to convert the equipment. Boston Bowl in Dorchester, I think, is the only example of a conversion. I think it converted from 10-pin to Candlepin, although I need to probably look that up and confirm that. And that was unusual. I think it was more that in the early days of the game, you could kind of pick and choose. And, you had pin boys. And so, you could use any ball and any type of pin, and you weren't committed to any type of game. And it was only when they had to start investing in pin setting equipment that they had to pick one and stick with it.
Okay. Michael Pisno put in the chat that his name is pronounced Pisno, like no pies backwards. So thanks for that, Michael. I'll try to get that correct in the future. We had another one here, question. Actually, people are writing in about the location of the bowling centers in Cincinnati and also in Pittsburgh. But Joe Marlin asks, are there movies of the bowling so that people can see what the game actually looks like?
Yes, I mean, certainly on YouTube. There are various channels on YouTube that have resurrected all or many of the Saturday shows, and you can watch a lot of these matches on YouTube.
Oh,
and see the game.
Okay.
So I think there are even some YouTube channels devoted to that.
Wow.
Also, any of those, Ben Affleck, the Affleck and Wahlberg type movies, a few of them have, I think there's a movie with one of the Wahlbergs called Southie. And I think that has a scene here. I'll look it up. That has a scene in a Candlepin alley in South Boston Bowl. Okay. Sorry, while I look that up. The 1999 film Southie included a scene at South Boston Candlepin. There was also an episode of Anthony Bourdain, No Reservations, that took place at South Boston Candlepin.
Oh, well, that's pretty big time stuff.
Yeah, so that was pretty interesting. And that new Ben Affleck movie, whose name just totally escapes me, did have a scene at Wakefield Bowlodrome.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure.
Maybe somebody watching knows the name of it. And while we're on names, Jonathan is telling us that his name, I was saying it Malspach, is Mosbach. So Mosbach. Thanks, Jonathan. I'll try to do better in the future. Jeff Klein comes in with the name of the movie. It's called Air, A-I-R, Air.
No,
And
not that movie. I mean, that's the new one, but that's not the movie with the bowling.
okay.
I guess it's the 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 next to most recent one. I'll figure it out.
Jonathan Mosbach says they even did an episode of The Simpsons about candlepin bowling. It's always the third ball. Not sure what that means. It's always the third ball. Jonathan, if you're online, would you like to come on to talk to, let me see if I can unmute you here. Where's Jonathan? There he is. I will, okay, you've been unmuted, Jonathan. If you want to come on and say anything. No, maybe he's gone. Okay, that's all right.
No pressure.
Yeah, no
the
pressure.
movie is the Tender Bar.
Oh, okay, there you go. I had a
but I want to say something about the Simpsons episode, because they also came up with these really funny names for the Candlepin bowling alleys that are kind of puns based on Massachusetts names and politicians.
Oh, that's interesting.
That was kind of cool. A lot of inside jokes, I think.
Yeah. Apparently
the creators of the Simpsons are from around here, I believe.
Okay. There's also apparently a documentary. Wayne Petty is telling us there's a documentary by Ricky Layton centering on candlepin bowling in Maine, and that's available on YouTube too. So there seems to be quite a bit of stuff out there for those who are interested. You made a comment, Susan, I wanted to ask you about. First of all, I love that the Leda lanes, the signs you showed of the various bowling centers. And I love the way they use the candlepins for the L's in the name of their establishment. But you said that, and also at Leda Lanes, there's something called Kegler's Den, which I guess is a lounge or a restaurant in there. Great name, Kegler's Den. But you said they've gone on, they're trying to reinvent the game. What did you mean by reinvent the game?
I think, well, I didn't mean the game itself. I meant the experience of the game. I think in my observation, it almost, when I was researching my book, it struck me that there was kind of a divide in the candlepin world. There were a lot of like these old school houses that had, it was just bowling. They didn't update anything. There was no food, there was no beverages, maybe they didn't take credit cards. They were sort of like stuck in time. And to some extent, I really like those places, but a lot of people don't, or they're expecting sort of a more immersive experience. And there seems to be like a new almost generation of candlepin proprietors, many of whom grew up in the game. Maybe their parents owned a bowling center and they're buying one. And they're sort of trying to kind of change the experience. And they're adding, a brew pub, they're adding pizza, they're adding ice cream. And they're sort of trying to make it more inviting, I guess, and sort of modernize the experience of going bowling, so it can kind of compete with the 10-pin experience, which really is a lot of bells and whistles and, these fancy, chains that have bars and drinks and, I don't know what. So that's what I meant.
Oh, okay. Oh, that makes sense.
But the game is the game.
Yes.
They're not changing the game.
I'm a big fan of 5-pin bowling. This is very popular in Southern Ontario and in Canada, which uses more standard type of pins, but still 5 pins and small balls. And, it makes the game more fun, especially for people that are not really, avid bowlers, because the 10-pin balls are quite heavy and hard to handle. With a 5-pin and a candlepin and duck pin, I guess, it's more fun because it's not as much of a struggle to try and throw the balls.
Yeah, a lot of people say, candlepin is great for kids and old people. because the balls are so small.
Well, I fit one of those categories.
Yeah, well, what can I say? Oh, here, I have a duck pin. Do you want me to show my duck pin?
Yeah, sure.
Here's a duck pin.
Okay, great. Yeah, very similar to 5-pin, although the 5-pin ones have the bumper or the rubber band, as you called it, on them.
Yeah,
Well, that's the end of the questions and the comments, unless anybody else would like to, anybody else want to have a final word with Susan? Okay, I guess we've got through it all. We had 52 participants tonight, Susan, which is quite good.
yay.
I think quite good. So I'd just like to thank you again for a very interesting presentation. It's I love this kind of regional stuff. It's great. And I'd like to thank everybody who came out tonight to watch the presentation as well. I'm sure you thoroughly enjoyed it. Susan, can you tell us how we can get your book, if it's still available, or your new book that's coming out?
Sure. Well, it's definitely still, okay, so we'll start with, I have 3 books, okay? So let me also mention my first book, which is New England Neon, and then New England Candlepin Bowling, and then the new one coming out is Along Route 1. All 3 were published by Arcadia Publishing. You can get them from Arcadia, arcadiapublishing.com. You can get them wherever books are sold, which is code for Amazon. No, they're in, I see them in independent bookstores all the time. Or you can get them from me directly, and I will sign it however you want, and I will send it out direct to you. And you can go to my website, rednickel.com, and order it from me directly, or you can go to your neighborhood independent bookstore and have them order it if they don't have it in stock. There's really a lot of ways to get these books. The Route 1 book is available for pre-order right now. It won't get shipped until May 22nd, but it's also available on these outlets, including on my website.
Okay, Jonathan Mosbach also said, how can I get the book autographed? And I guess you answered that question is by ordering it directly from you at rednickel.com. And if they put a little note in, would you please autograph? I'm sure you'd be happy to do that.
Of course, I love signing books.
Yeah.
Sometimes I go into bookstores and offer to sign my own books.
Great. You should
And it's great. They don't ask for ID or anything, I could be anyone.
Well, they probably check the picture of the author on the back cover of the book and see if it's.
I don't know what they do. I think so few people do it that they just figure who would,
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you again, Susan. I just like to remember or to remind everyone about next month, when on Wednesday, the May 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central and 5 Pacific, we will join architect and preservationist Daniel Vieira and photographer Mark Havens as they present the rich mid-century modern motel architecture of Wildwood, New Jersey. SCA members will be receiving the relevant details and registration link by email, and others can register through the SCA website directly. Thank you to everyone who came out tonight for spending some time with us. If you're not already a member of the SCA, you will be receiving an email either later tonight or tomorrow morning inviting you to join if you enjoyed what you saw tonight. Also, if you have friends that were not able to watch the presentation live, it will be available on the SCA website, sca-roadside.org, probably tomorrow for you to watch. And with that, Susan, I'll thank you again, and I will wish everyone a good night, and we'll see you next month.
Yes, thank you, everyone. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
All right, good night.